Good morning. Boker Tov, everybody. Great to see you once again on a beautiful Tuesday morning, Erev Hanukkah, right? Hanukkah's in a few days. Super exciting. So I'd like to start off, as usual, with giving tzedakah. Grab your tzedakah box. Gedol tzedakah shemikareves es ha'geula. And good morning, everyone. Let's see, here's someone asking me to, I don't know how to do that. Okay, so we're going to start off by saying Tehillim. So please put down any names that you would like for us to daven for. Denise will have in mind Hinda Bas Menachem Mendel today in our class. She should be a good Tibeter for you. And good morning, Carol and Randy. Good morning, everybody. We'll say Tehillim today. I have some names here. Devar Leah Bas Yafa Liba. We'll say Tehillim for her. We have Chaim Shazam Yehuda Ben Hinda Yocheved should continue seeing B'suras Tovos. We have Chaya Bas Tikva Kela. And good to report that last week we said Shazam Ben Esther Goldie, and he had a full recovery. So I like sharing good news also, not just Tehillim that we have to say. Okay, chapter 20. You should all know this by heart now. Here we go. For all those who need a speedy recovery. Good morning, Becky from Israel. Francesca. Francesca, where are you from? Let's see. Tell me where you're from. I'd love to know where you're watching. Oh, Ezra Ben Michal. Good morning, Shelley. Ava. Good morning, Pamela and Elaine. Good morning, Sharon. We make a Misha Berach for your parents who are in Kensington retirement home. Both have COVID. Oh, okay, absolutely. Sharon, if you can give us their Jewish names, that would be great. Okay. Miriam Reza, Shoshana Bas Hena Chaya. We have Fega Gittel Bas Chana and Pinchas Ben Rezol. Yes, we should hear B'suras Tovos next week. Please share the good news. Good morning, Elise, Azalea, Italia, Milano. You're from Italy. Okay, Francesca, welcome. I should have realized that. Welcome. Beautiful. Okay, hope you have a wonderful Hanukkah in Italy this year, right? Okay, Bela Chana. Let me get that name again. Bela Chana Bas Rivkalea. Refuah Shalema. And we have here Yaakov Moshe Ben Achama. Okay, we have a lot of people to daven for, guys, so we better give it all we got. Lamanatseach Mizmar le David, Yancha Dinar Biyom Tzara, Yisagefcha Shem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach Ezracha Mikodesh Umetzion Yisadeka, Yiskar Kol Mechasecha Valascha Yidash Nesela. Yiten Lechach Vavecha V'chol Atzascha Yimale. Nirana B'shuasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgol, Yimalei Adonai Kol Mashalasecha. Ata yedati ki Yoshia Adonai Mashiach Yanei Mishmei Kodsho B'Gvuras Yesha Yimino. Ela v'recha ve'ela v'asusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir. Hema karu v'nafalu v'anachnu kamnu v'nisodad. Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu b'yom karenu. And Chaya Refuah Shalema Chaya Bas Hena. Good morning, Tamara from South Africa. Good morning, Arlene and Esther. Pinchas Rezel and Fegi Gittel Bas Chana. Okay. They all have a Refuah Shalema. And I'm also going to go out on a limb and say, make a bracha for Avram ben Sarmindel. He should have hatzlacha and success in his life. So, how is everyone feeling? Because you're all different parts of the world, and I'm used to having my friends that we're learning with together in front of me. So give me a thumbs up if you're feeling good. And put down in the comments one word to describe how you're feeling this morning. Just want to mention it's a gorgeous day outside. Yeah, it's -10 or 6 here in Toronto, but it's a gorgeous day. Hanukkah's around the corner. We still have COVID, but the first shot was given this morning to a woman in her 90s in England. I want to know how you're feeling because today's class is going to be discussing Sigmund Freud's outlook on life versus Alfred Adler, Viktor Frankl, and the Baal HaTanya. There were four great masters. The Alter Rebbe lived in the late 1700s. Freud and Adler lived later on in the 1800s, mid-1800s. Viktor Frankl, of course, we know was a Holocaust survivor, so he was in the early 1900s. I want to discuss these four philosophers, if you want. I don't know if I want to put the Alter Rebbe in the same sentence, but they were all great thinkers. And for those of you who have heard of these four great thinkers, give me what your feelings are regarding them. I see Corinne says your mood is hopeful, grateful, looking forward to Hanukkah, grateful, feeling blessed, hopeful and happy. We have a tired right here. Dorit says, my master's in psychology, the Delirian psychology. Very interesting, Dorit. So we're going to discuss a little bit of Adler and his psychology and his philosophy today. I'm in the middle of taking my second coaching course, also based on Viktor Frankl, but a lot of it is based on the Baal HaTanya. So let's get straight to it. All our philosophy students out there. Perek Tanya, that we are getting into today, chapter 34, which is in Hebrew, Lamed Daled. Chapter 34 talks to us about, it's actually the last section on how to be happy. And I want to just give you the way the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, addresses this. And by the way, for those, Francisca says, it's possible to match philosophy and religion according to you. Stay tuned. You'll find out soon, Francesca. Chapter 34, which is is going to give us a brief history of the divine revelation. But do you know what we just celebrated 3 days ago? On Shabbat was Yud Kislev. Anybody can write down in the comments, what is the significance of the 19th of Kislev? Anybody? Putting a challenge out there. You know I like to challenge you guys. Challenging you, what was on Shabbat, the Hebrew day of Yud Kislev? Anybody know? Okay. Yud Kislev is the Chag HaGeula, the day of redemption. For who? The Baal HaTanya was thrown into jail in the around 1795, 1790, exactly. He was released from jail. Chana, excellent. Chag HaGeula, Becky, great. Why was he in jail? Well, there are two versions of it. He started spreading Hasidus, and the luminaries were not sure if the world was ready for Hasidic philosophy, for the Hasidic teaching. That was the spiritual reason. The physical reason was because the Alter Rebbe was sending money to Israel, which was then under the Turkish rule, who was in direct conflict with Russia. So he was thrown into jail for being a traitor, for espionage. But nothing physical happens without having a spiritual dynamics. And spiritually, the question was the world ready for Hasidus? Now, for all of you who are studying with us, and we have usually over 500, 600, sometimes 1,000 views on Tanya, it's clear that the world is ready for Hasidus. I mean, how would you find 1,000 people interested in learning Tanya in 2020, when the world is so full of so much chaos and uncertainty and loss of economy and loss of our friends? But Hasidus brings light. It sheds an inner dimension of godliness into the world. So until now, what was taught was fantastic, but the world has to constantly be evolving. And so the Alter Rebbe said, yes, Francesca, people against Hasidism were Jewish. Yes, that is true. But the world needs Hasidus right now because we are in a state of darkness, spiritual darkness. And I want to give you an insight, and I want you to tell me if you feel the same way. If you go on social media, you'll find people are very down. A dear friend of mine will post things like, how are you feeling today? And she gets like 45 comments of down, depressed, insecure, unsure, and so much heaviness. And I actually, my husband knows this, when I look at that post, I want to cry. Cry for all the people that are feeling so down and so exhausted and so stressed out when all they have to do is open a book of Tanya. Get into Torah study. I promise you that you will not be as down and depressed as you were a half hour before. Why? That's the question we are going to focus on today. Are you ready? Give me a thumbs up if you want to know why so many people are suffering from depression and anxiety. And again, I'm not talking about medical depression. I'm talking about just sadness, exhausted, flat, as these are the comments I'm seeing. But I need to know how and why we should get out there and learn Torah. If you're ready, give me that thumbs up so I know we should go full force ahead. Good morning, Arlene. Okay. So basically, I wanted to uncover, let the party begin. Allison, good morning. Okay. So we're going to start off with the three very famous philosophers. Sigmund Freud, okay, Alfred Adler, and as I mentioned earlier, one of my great, I would say a great interesting teacher is Viktor Frankl. So who are these guys and what did they teach? So first of all, Sigmund Freud, what was his whole philosophy? He felt that the greatest drive for a human being is the ability to fulfill your sexual needs. If a person gets that opportunity to fulfill all their sexual desires, they will be happy. Do you agree with this? Okay. Then we had Alfred Adler, and I know, Dorit, you mentioned that you've taken his courses, you've studied him. He was on a little bit of a different level. He felt that the greatest joy a human being has is when they have the ability to have power. To be able to say, I am in control. The power of control conquers your sadness and gives you the feeling of absolute truth and absolute happiness. Do you think that's true? Comes along Viktor Frankl, an incredible Holocaust survivor, who was a philosopher before he was taken to Auschwitz. Then he survived and came out and continued to be an incredible teacher and philosopher. Wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read the book, I recommend you read it. And he says the way to greatest joy is to have meaning and purpose in your life. And today there are so many coaching sessions and coaches out there that are based on his philosophy. The absolute meaning of purpose. That if a person wakes up in the morning and they have a meaning and they have a purpose in their life, they can jump out of bed no matter what time they go to sleep, no matter how much they have to wake up in the morning, no matter how much they have to do. They have to meet clients, they have to meet patients, they have to pay a mortgage. They wake up with joy because they have purpose and meaning. And we spoke about it last week. That means having a tough kid, having a purpose and knowing your purpose. But then comes the Alter Rebbe, who was even before all of these. He's the late 1700s. And he uncovers something which is absolutely brilliant. What does he say? He says, you want to be happy? You ready, my friends? You ready for this revelation? The Alter Rebbe says like this: if you really want to be happy, if you really want to be able to wake up in the morning and be excited and joyous and joyful, no matter what happens with you, let me tell you, being joyous when you wake up in the Bahamas is no big deal. I mean, I would say it's pretty really depressing if you wake up in Bahamas and you're depressed. But waking up in Mexico or waking up on Miami Beach and you're happy, you're on vacation, big deal. But the real test is if you could wake up in your makom, in your place where you live, and you have to wake up for work, and you have to wake up for the laundry, and you have to wake up to your children, you have to wake up for your job, and you wake up with joy. How do you get there? So Alter Rebbe says very simple. He says, if you see the godliness in the world, if you recognize potential for Hashem in your life, then every single minute gives you purpose. So, let's get onto today's class. Are you ready? We know that the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamas, give me a thumbs up if you remember those terms. Otherwise, I'll explain them to you in English. I was going to say in English. Nefesh Bahamas and Nefesh Elokis are the two souls that are constantly in struggle in each one of you. Good morning, Hannah from Israel. Our souls are constantly in struggle. The Nefesh Elokis, the Nefesh Bahamas. And you're wondering, who's the real you? Now, but you can put it down in the comments. Who's the real you? Are you the Nefesh Bahamas? Are you the animal soul? Are you the Nefesh Elokis? Are you a godly soul? Who are you? So, I will tell you that according to Torah, according to the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, Randy, we are first and foremost a Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Bahamas, my friend, is here to give us a struggle, because the struggle is all about what Hashem wants us to do. But who are you really? Randy, who are you really? When a person dies after 120 and their soul goes up to God, who goes up to God? Their godly soul or their animal soul? For those of you who haven't purchased my husband's book, 7 Conversations with Jerry, he addresses this exactly big dilemma. Who are we? Are we an animal soul or are we the godly soul? The animal soul is just here, exactly, Randy, to challenge us. But we are just a godly soul. And every single day, your godly soul gives you a work format for the day. He tells you, get out there and conquer the world. We do have both, Corinne, you're right. We have both. But who are you? In other words, are you your hair color? Is that you, or is it your soul? Well, people see you. They see your hair color. They think, oh, that's who you are. Your hair and your eyes and your nose and your mouth. Your physical attributes. No, you're not. Because when a person dies, that gets buried. But their essence, their godly soul, still stays alive. So you are the godly soul. The only reason why we have an animal soul is because we have to be challenged. Hashem wants us to have free choice. Remember, this is a world of free choice. If you didn't have an animal soul, good morning, Tamara. If you didn't have an animal soul, then there would be no big deal for every good thing you did. But every time you choose to do a mitzvah, every time you choose to do something good, you have given life to your divine soul. That's right, Allison. You've given energy to the godly soul. The animal said, don't give charity. You know, we're having a charity now at our shul. And we're almost 50% there. After the class, feel free to go on chabadmarkham.org and give something towards our charity. But people see the charity and they go, well, you know, I'm not really ready up to giving charity today. You know, I give last month, I gave. But we know a Jew has to give 10% at least. And Tanya says even 20% to charity. So charity, at that moment, your animal soul and your divine soul are in conflict. Animal soul says, what are you giving so much charity for? You know, there's a great sweater for sale on Amazon. And I can order Uber Eats. If I give my $36 or my $72 to charity, then that takes away from my, you know, half of the pair of shoes I want to buy. So that's the struggle you're going to have today. Should you give charity or not? Karine, you're right. No one ever became poor from giving. In fact, the only wealth you really have is the wealth you gave. That's really, at the end of the day, the only wealth you have, who are you worth, is only what you gave to charity. So if you gave $72, you're worth 72. If you gave 1,000, then you're worth 1,000, right? Your money is there to share. So you need to have that nefesh habahamis, that animal soul, because if you don't have the animal soul, the godly soul is going to give away all your money, because the godly soul just wants to help, just wants to give. Now, you can't give away all your money because you need to live. That's what Tanya says. A person shouldn't give more than 20%, unless you're someone like Bill Gates who can give 50% and he'll still be pretty comfortable. Arlene is right. The more you give, the more you get. Absolutely. So the Alter Rebbe tells us here, the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh Bahamis is at odds to each other. And when you give, like Allison says, giving is what fills your soul. The giver gives as much as the receiver. But when you give, that's when your soul is alive. And when your soul is alive, that's when you're happy. So for all the people that are feeling down, I say to them, and Allison, please recommend it to all your people on your posts. Say to them, you're feeling down, you're feeling depleted, you're feeling nervous. Do a mitzvah. Then answer your question on Instagram. Do a mitzvah and then answer 2 minutes later. After you do a mitzvah, it's 100% guaranteed that you will feel elated. 10 minutes later, you're feeling down again? Do another mitzvah. Get online and listen to a class. Go on Facebook and listen to class. There are hundreds of thousands of shiurim, lectures, Torah lectures out there that will inspire you and uplift your life. So when a person is worrying about themselves all the time, they'll be sad. I'm sorry to say there's nothing that can help. Think about yourself all day, you will feel sad. Think about someone else, you will feel happy. Now, what is it to be able to discover yourself? How do we discover yourself? So Tanya gives us two ideas. First of all, he says, like I mentioned before, mitzvahs. But there's something that in this week's chapter that is very interesting. The Alter Rebbe says that our patriarchs and matriarchs were selfless. And he gives an analogy. Okay, you ready for the analogy? He says they are like chariots. Chariots. Can you give me in the comments, what do you think Tanya is alluding to when it says that our matriarchs and our patriarchs were chariots? Okay, I'm going to wait a few seconds to give you a chance to answer the question. It's a little bit of a philosophical question. It's a Kabbalistic question, but nevertheless, I want you to think. Why would our matriarchs and our patriarchs be considered chariots? Chariots for Hashem. Okay, so I'm going to give you the answer. The chariots to its driver are very, very batul. Batul, we said, means very nullified. A chariot is insignificant to the driver. The driver tells the chariot, go this way. The chariot goes that way. The chariot has no will of its own. It just does what it has to do. The driver says this way, the chariot follows, right? The chariot is a conduit to the driver. And that's what our patriarchs and our matriarchs were. They were just conduits for Hashem's Torah and mitzvahs. Hashem said, bring godliness in the world, discover Hashem, open your tent for visitors. Yitzchak went up to be a karban, a sacrifice to Hashem. Yaakov gave birth to the 12 tribes. All of these things they did because they were chariots for God's will. That's it. They had no will of their own. Were they great people? Oh my gosh, they are the founders of our nation. Of course they were the greatest people. But did you ever think what made them great? It wasn't their ego. It wasn't the fact that Abraham saw God. Think about Moses, the greatest leader that ever lived. in the Jewish people, in the world. Moses went up to God and stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights. Came face to face with Hashem. Is anyone out there even greater than Moshe? But Moshe was Anav Mikol Ha'adam. Do you know what that means? Give me a thumbs up if you ever heard that expression. Anav Mikol Ha'adam. He was the most humble of all people. How great and godly and brilliant and dynamic that he was still a Merkava. He was still considered a chariot. Just a simple chariot. Batul. Complete nullification to our Creator. So being a leader, and yet you're nullified. Imagine we could say that about our leaders today, that they have bittul. Ha! What a joke! The ego that gets into our leaders today. But here we have the true leaders that you and I can learn from. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We have Moses. We have the greatest leaders and the greatest inspiration. And they were batul. They were nullified before Hashem. Why? Not because they didn't have any self-esteem. Being nullified doesn't mean you don't have a self-esteem. Let's not get confused. Being humble does not mean you have no self-esteem. Being humble means you know where your energy, your credentials, where your life comes from. Being aware that you know where you come from, that you come from Hashem, and everything that you have, good morning, Nikki, everything that you have comes from Hashem. And your will and your desire is in sync with God. So when God says, wake up in the morning and daven, you grab a siddur, you open it up, you daven. You have a million things to do? That will wait. Or as I said to my friend the other day, a mother of 3 beautiful children, I said to her, you want to daven? Send your kids off to school and then you pray. But you know that when you're working and getting your children ready for school, you're nurturing Hashem's children. You're singing Moda Ani as you're getting them ready for breakfast. Then they go to school. You come home. You have 15 minutes, a half hour. Then you pray. So your day is infused with godliness. And that, by the way, that surrendering of your ego, which stands for, as we said many times, what does ego stand for? EGO, you should know this by now, edging God out. For those who edge God out are full of ego. And when you're full of ego, you cannot be happy. End of story. Yes, Freud says if you nurture your sexual prowess and you have all the sexual activities you want, you'll be happy. Wrong. Look at all the people that are addicted to sexual behavior. They are the most unhappy people. People that are in relationships and are cheating on their spouses. Unhappiest people. They might have pleasure for a little while, but that's not happiness. Let's not confuse pleasure with real joy. It's not the same thing, because pleasure comes and goes, but joy is everlasting. So all those people that are having one-night stands, or the people that are searching for sexual pleasures at infinity, people that are on all these inappropriate sites looking for that is totally not joy. So let's scrap out Sigmund Freud. He's done. What about Adler? Adler said when you have power. Well, look at the people that are out there up in powerful situations. Maybe some of our leaders in government, some of the big CEOs. Would you say they have the most pleasure in the world? Because you have power, because you have might, because you have the money? I have to tell you a great story that my friend Yehudis Blooming shared with me. So Yehudis is a shlucha in campus, and she tells the story that one of the professors took her and her husband and introduced her to Walmart's daughter. Now, Mr. Walton is the owner of Walmart. How many of you like Walmart? All of us, right? Even though this is lockdowns, Walmart's still open, right? So the owner of Walmart, a very wonderful man by the name of Mr. Walton, who gives a lot of tzedakah. But I have to tell you something. So his daughter lives near this shlucha. And my friend Yehudis was invited to go meet with her. And there was a few people with my friend Yehudis. It was her, it was the professors. And I think they went in, maybe they were looking to get someone to build their Chabad house, campus Chabad house. And she had a wonderful time. And when she walked out, the professor said to her, well, what did you think? So my friend who teaches Tanya, who's a great Tanya teacher as well, she said, she must be a very happy person. She's the second richest woman in the world. So the professor says to her, Yehudis, you should know, she's not nearly happy as you. I know her well, but the joy that you have, because you are living the life of Torah, the life of Judaism, she doesn't come close to your happiness. And I just heard this story yesterday, and I thought, well, that's very insightful coming from a professor, because on the outside, externals does seem to win. When you see someone driving the fanciest cars and living in the biggest mansions, they have it all, you would think they have joy. But again, that's externals. The Tanya is talking about internals. The Tanya is showing us how to have our Torah and how to have our neshama to be at peace, to be in joy, to be thrilled about life, and to be able to be surrendered. Now, how many of you, okay, give me a thumbs up, how many of you have ever heard of the book, The Surrendered Wife, written by Doyle? Anybody heard her book, The Surrendered Wife? Let me know if you've heard of a book. Corinne says, money can't buy happiness. Absolutely. Being poor isn't happy either, but there has to be more. That's right. If someone has money and they have, mitzvahs, then they'll have true happiness. They'll give tzedakah, they'll have happiness. But anybody heard of the book, The Surrendered Wife? So I read her book. In fact, there's a lot of things I like in her book. I see a lot of people are sharing that they've seen her book. Okay. So what's the premise of The Surrendered Wife? What does it mean, bittul? Because bittul means to surrender. Surrender means that you give yourself up for someone else. Now, how does that work in marriage? Because, I like to make my Tanya classes very practical. I'm just a practical person. I can't, I don't live in Olam Hatzilut, one of the higher leveled worlds. I live in very much Olam Hasiya, very practical world. So bittul means to surrender yourself. And in the surrendered marriage, what I did take away from that book, I'm not telling you that's the godliest book out there, but the point that I did like was that she talks about surrendering yourself and opening yourself up to your spouse. Being humble, being selfless, and becoming one. That ability to nullify yourself and to become one with your spouse. Actually, the Torah says, Vahayu lebasar echad, right? When God created Adam and then he created Eve, he said, you are two people, now you become basar echad. You should become one being, one entity. That's what marriage is supposed to become. When you feel that you and your husband are one, now you're two physical beings, but when you become one, you share the same loves, the same direction, the same passion. You have the same goals. You're involved with the same volunteering. You have the same focus. That's a great marriage. If you have a couple that she wants this way and he wants that one, they don't see eye to eye in anything, those marriages have a very, very hard time. But when we have a marriage that they're in sync, and it doesn't mean you have the same nature, and it doesn't mean you have the same way about going things, and you don't like the same food. I could like, omelets and he enjoys a steak. I would prefer a salad and he enjoys a steak. All right. This might resonate with a lot of women out there, but regardless, your passion, you both have a godly focus. And when you have that, when a couple has that, and you nullify each other to get into each other's world, you're humble enough to see each other from eye to eye. That allows you to become a merkava, to become a chariot for each other. And then You become a chariot for Hashem. Why? Because you realize that your goal here in this world is not egotistical. It's not about I came down here to become wealthy. My role isn't down here is to become the greatest entrepreneur, and I need to become the greatest influencer, and I need to become the greatest, marriage coach out there, or I need to become the greatest professor out there. That's not going to give you happiness. But Hashem gave you skills. Hashem gave you talents. Yes, you could become a great influencer and a great teacher and a great business person and a wonderful CEO. But what are you going to do with that? That's the question. What are you going to do with that? You're going to share it with others. You're going to nurture others. You're going to teach others. You're going to guide others with godly, wholesome, spiritual goals. If you are a great philanthropist and you inspire others to give, you have completed your godly soul's mission. Imagine that feeling that you know what your tafkid is, like Viktor Frankl says, you have meaning, you know what your meaning is, and then what the Alter Rebbe says is, tune into your godliness. Take that meaning and give it a godly voice. It says about Moses, it says, Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. Anybody ever heard that expression? Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. That means that God spoke through his throat. Spoke through his throat. So I'll give you a little secret. Before I start teaching Tanya, every Tuesday morning, I open my Tehillim, I say a chapter Tehillim, and I say to Hashem these words, Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. Now, I am not Moses, maybe on Moses' little toe. But what am I saying is I'm saying to Hashem, I want to teach your Torah. I want to teach your Chassidus. So help me with the right words. Help me say the right words. Because I'm a little Goldie. I don't know anything compared to the great masters. But I want to teach what the great masters have taught. Like the Rebbe said, if you know Aleph, you teach Aleph. I don't have to become a great Talmudic scholar before I start giving classes. If you know Aleph, you teach Aleph. If you know Aleph Beis, you teach Aleph Beis. So I say to Hashem, I'm davening, help me with the right words. Help give me the right words to share. Thank you, Francesca. I'm humbled right now. So what we want to be when we wake up in the mornings, we say, make me a chariot to Hashem. Let me take my body and my talent and my money and my abilities and let them be a conduit to Hashem's teachings, to Hashem's holiness. Now, how do we do that? So let's say a person has to go to work. So they can't be involved with godliness a whole day. So the Alter Rebbe says something so profound. He says, but if you worked all day and you took 10 or 20% from that and gave it tzedakah, you've elevated your whole entire day of working. So imagine, you go to sleep at night and you make a din v'cheshbon, right? You make a list of what you've accomplished by day. And you say to yourself, well, without being arrogant, I did work today and I gave my tzedakah from today. In my spare time, I said some tehillim and I davened. And you can think about all the mitzvahs that you did. And you've been able to accomplish the fact that you are today a chariot for Hashem. I want to end off with a story about my husband's grandfather. His name was Avram Plotkin. Avram Plotkin was a young, brilliant scholar. He lived in the days of the 5th Chabad Rebbe and the 6th Chabad Rebbe. He was a student in the Litvisher system, not Chabad, and he was a genius. But he needed more. So he found his way in the courts of the Chabad Hasidim. He came in and he said, I'd like to become a Chassid. So the Frierdiker Rebbe approached his father, who was the Rebbe then, the Rebbe Rashab, and he said to him, we have a very, very great Talmid Chacham. He wants to join our ranks. Isn't that incredible? So the Rebbe Rashab met him, and he said he's not ready to become a Chabad Chassid yet. So Friedrich Rebbe says, why? He says, he's too full of arrogance. He's a big Torah scholar, but he's full of himself. You know, when you become a scholar, we said before, even Torah studying could make you egotistical. He says he's full of himself. He can't become a chassid yet. So the Friedrich Rebbe says, but he wants to come. What should I do? So the Friedrich Rebbe says, so the Rebbe Rashab says to him, let him go, it's Erev Pesach, let him go work in the matzah factory, and after a week of working in the matzah factory, we'll talk. So they approached my husband's grandfather. His name was also Avram Plotkin, who my husband's named after. And he said to him, you're welcome to join the Chabad movement, but the Rebbe wants you to first work in the matzah factory. But my Zayda didn't say a word. He humbled himself. He really wanted to become a chassid of the Rebbe. He wanted to become involved with Chabad Chassidus. So he worked day and night. And you know, by the way, baking matzahs, it's even harder than cooking a whole Pesach. It's sweating a whole day, making the dough and rolling the dough and flipping it and putting it in the oven day and night and day and night. Finally, it was the day before Pesach. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, no, could we bring him in? And the Rebbe Shem says, no. First he has to study a certain discourse in Hasidic philosophy. I'll test him and then I'll decide. And he did. He was exhausted from staying up a whole week of baking. And he studied that Hasidic philosophy. And then he was taken into the Rashab. And when he was brought into the Rashab tells the Friedrich Rebbe, look at his face. Look at his face. How the sweat of doing in mitzvahs and studying in Torah, it made his face edel. It refined him. So, you know, studying Torah, you have a lot of people who are studying a lot of Torah, but they still have a lot of ego because they know, I know the whole Talmud by heart. I know the whole Chumash by heart. I know all of the esoterics by heart. Very nice. But has it made you a chariot to God? Is it all about you? Or is it about you becoming humble to Hashem? That's a very interesting question. And he ended up becoming a great Hasidic master, this Zayda. And I'm going to show you a picture. And I want to show you something really interesting. My grandfather, so Zayda Avramela, that's my husband's grandfather. He became Lubavitch, but then we have a picture of him next to my grandfather. This picture was taken over 70 years ago, before my husband and I clearly got married. And here's a picture of the two of them together. There's my grandfather, B'tzi and Shem Tov. That's my husband's grandfather, Avramela Plotkin, posing together at a meeting in France, way before their two grandchildren got married. So, what's our challenge this week? Our challenge this week is, let's try to become chariots for Hashem. So for this week, we'll try to allow ourselves to be conduits to Hashem, allowing us to do things with what Hashem has given us, doing it for godliness. So if you have something extra you share it with someone, you feel like you're losing patience, you have more patience for people. Everything that Hashem has given us, we'll do it for godliness, we'll do it for Hashem. And let me know next week how happy you were. Have a great week, my friends. I'm wishing you a wonderful Hanukkah. Tune in. There's amazing things going on online. Hanukkah lightings all over the world. I'm sharing a lot of stuff on Facebook. My son Mendy organized this around-the-clock, 12 hours straight of menorah lightings from around the world. He contacted 50 shluchim around the world, and every 15 minutes there's going to be another shliach in the most exotic places, from in front of the Queen's Palace to in front of Eiffel Towers to crazy places. And maybe Shachar Banin, my dear friend from Venice, hopefully they can contact her as well, and she could light the menorah there. Okay, wishing you a great Yantiv.